Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for the Interphos. This is the final trial made available by the MSQ in Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. If the gravity of this encounter is as heavy to bear as the crown upon Svein's head, don't banish yourself to the domain of ignorance. If you think this fight is a royal pain in the ass, maybe you need a perspective shift. My name is Miss Tech and I'll be your trial guide. The encounter begins with legitimate force. Her arms will begin to glow in succession and players will need to move opposite each one to avoid the incoming half-room cleaves. Aether Tithe will cause the boss's mouth-eye thing to glow, deal multiple hits of raid-wide damage, and suck in part of the platform, warping its plane like so. Players will need to keep an eye out for the distorted sections of the platform and move out of them to avoid death. The raid-wide hits continue throughout this entire mechanic, so healers be ready with those shields and heals. When the boss casts Coronation, wide circle telegraphs will appear and begin to chase players for a short time before settling and exploding. Players can wait until the green arrows appear inside the circle marker before moving out of the way to avoid getting hit. These will persist for some time, so watch your feet. Prosecution of War will target the primary target with a heavy hitting tank buster. Cooldown and heal as necessary. Virtual Shift will deal high raid-wide damage and alter the platform. The next Coronation cast will target two players and tether them to a large triangle on the edge. These players will be able to drag this triangle around by their tethers, and since they don't want to hit the raid with the attack, it's best to find a safe spot for it and then stop moving, allowing the rest of the raid to move out of the way. Downburst will knock back all players from the marker on the platform. Players can use a knockback immunity or position themselves to be knocked down the available platform without getting thrown off. Drones will appear in this circle pattern, and all players will need to move inside the center to avoid the incoming room-wide donut attack. Powerful Gust forms another knockback from one of the sides of the arena, and players will need to pre-position or use a knockback immunity to avoid getting knocked off the platform. The next Virtual Shift will again deal raid-wide damage and return the platform back to normal. Another Coronation triangle will appear, immediately followed by more Aether Tithe damage and platform warping. The triangle will resolve first, and tethered players can stay still to keep the attack in one spot before everyone quickly adjusts to avoid the platform warp attack. Mechanics will repeat until the next Virtual Shift cast. In this phase, all players will be levitated and two small platforms will appear on left and right. The boss will then cast Castellation, forming a giant wall with various holes in it. This wall will fly over the entire platform, knocking back and smooshing anyone not positioned appropriately to go through a hole. The boss will increase gravity and the levitation effect will soon be removed. Players must ensure that they're over a platform at this time to avoid falling to their death. Another Castellation wall will appear and players must again reposition themselves in line with the available holes to avoid death. More gravity shenanigans will cause players to float and they'll have another wall to reposition for. The boss will then cast legitimate force and players will need to dodge to the appropriate sides to avoid getting hit. Make sure you're on a platform for the next gravity shift. The boss will then cast Virtual Shift again, resetting the platform. Healers, don't forget your shields and heals. The next legitimate force cast will have two casts on the same side, and players will need to pay attention to the double power-up glow and dodge both attacks on the opposite side. Eventually, the boss will cast Absolute Authority, dealing high raid-wide damage and marking up a number of players with flare markers. These players will need to spread apart to avoid overlapping, while everyone else moves as far away from them to reduce the proximity-based damage. Immediately after, multiple circle ground attacks will appear and players will be marked with triangle stack-up markers. All players must find their way into the safe spots between the ground circles, while also stacking up with at least one other person to avoid death. These attacks will resolve at the same time. Another round of ground circles will appear and players will need to reposition into the new safe areas while getting ready to handle the next set of markers. 6 players will need to immediately stop moving and casting as their bomb debuffs begin to expire, and the 2 healers will form gaze attacks above their heads. All players will need to look away from the gaze players and stop moving or attacking to avoid the bomb explosion once their debuff expires. There are more sets of ground circle attacks, so make sure you continue to move into the available safe zones as necessary. There is a ton of healing requirement here, especially if players are mishandling their mechanics. This is a great spot to use raid cooldowns and be ready with those shields and heals. Eventually, the boss will cast Divide and Conquer, and each player will be targeted by line attacks that cannot be avoided. Spread these apart to avoid overlap. This will at first target each player sequentially, and then target all players at once, so make sure you stay spread to avoid killing one another. These mechanics will repeat for some time until the boss casts Royal Domain. Another Absolute Authority will begin, but before the phase really gets going, the boss will be interrupted by a cutscene and Wook Lamont. Dynastic Diadem is a massive donut attack attack, and players will need to move directly into the boss's hitbox to avoid getting hit. Royal Banishment will deal multiple hits of raid-wide damage and form large cone telegraphs over the platform in succession. Dodge each attack in the order that they appear. These mechanics will repeat while Wook Lamat roleplays Fiend to death. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Up next, we'll head into the extremes. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.